about some of the ways of working with the elements and principles. So you get this list of elements and principles and you go, what am I supposed to do with them? So if you think about things like balance and what's called visual weight, it's like, where do I want to put the most attention? Where do I want the focal point to be? So we can think about balance being a physical thing. You know, if we stand on one foot, we feel in balance. And what we do is we apply the same thing to a blank sheet of paper. So if we have a lot of things on one side, it can feel imbalanced, like there's nothing here and there's something here. So we've got those different kinds of balance. We know we've got symmetrical balance. That works, it always works, and a lot of you have done compositions with symmetrical balance straight up. They're guaranteed to work, but they're sometimes very boring and inactive. Also, what you want to think about is that the visual centre for our eyes is not the exact centre. It's actually a little bit higher. So if you've ever seen a book layout, any book you want to pick up, the bottom margin's always bigger because our visual centre, we're not comfortable. Things feel, if they're down here, they feel heavy. So visual weight comes into composition as well. And that's all about balance too. So some tricks for getting visual weight to work: you can have a large object, so size-wise, it's bigger, right? But contrast-wise, if that attracts just as much attention as that, you get a kind of a balance happening. So a really large, plain object with not much texture can balance a really high contrast. So high contrast is a way of making visual attention. Look here. So when you're doing your designs, if you have a really high contrast area, and sometimes it happens accidentally in the photo you choose, and you might have a person and there's a really dark black and white leaf outline behind their head, that's what you're looking at, not their face. So understanding this is just not for what we're doing, poster design, it's for any design. So being a lot more deliberate about it and really looking. So if I make that, think of this in terms of type, if that's not got much texture on it, it doesn't attract as much attention. As soon as I start to put texture on it, it starts to attract more attention. If I put a kind of a rough edge on it, it also attracts more attention. Whereas my plain one really just sits there, doesn't. So, same thing with this little guy. He's high contrast, and now he's wiggling around like crazy, got an uneven edge. Can you see the difference between how much attention you pay between that little dot with its nice smooth edge and this hairy one here? So an outside edge, you know, this comes to our type. So if we're talking about type and we've got a title, if we put our title in a fairly smooth font, it's not attracting, it's large, something like that. It's large, but it's low contrast. So it's not attracting much attention. And down here, I have a very important something I want to say, which on our movie poster might be, you know, open now, opening night or something, you know, or on an advertising poster might be on sale now. And you want to attract really a lot of attention to it, making it really kind of active, a piece of type that's really active and dark, high contrast, will pull your eyes to it, even if it's smaller. So that's quite small, but it's pulling your attention. So I think high contrast, small objects, or small pieces of type, can really balance out larger, less contrasting pieces of type. So it means you can, what that means is you can move away. See how this is not symmetrical balance, right? Symmetrical balance would have that circle there at the top and just sort of something here maybe. It's just not as interesting. But for some things it's really important to do symmetrical, especially if you're designing a logo for a bank. Nobody wants the bank to be, you know, upsetting and alarming. Yes, so it depends what you're trying to design for. So Now we start to think a little bit about the theatre poster design. And we want to think about this Fibbonacci stuff and the rule of thirds. So as you get into it, it is a grid structure, right? So the basis of most grid structures is something like this. Okay, that's a kind of a modular one. And the Fibbonacci is a great way of choosing that uneven, getting away from asymmetrical. So if I divide this into the rule of thirds, well, it's not very 30, but something like that. I'll pull that down so it looks more like an even third. The idea is to think about sectioning off. So particularly for your title, you might decide that the top third is actually taken up with your title. So it's there, it's blocking out that whole square. And then you could organise. Now see, if we've got that in there, we can use that as an organising element for our actors' names, for example. And then we've got this area, which might be the image. You could do something like that. Now we could take the same idea, the rule of thirds, and slightly tilt it, and maybe get something a little bit more exciting going on. But same thing, it's rule of thirds. So maybe I've got a face taking up that much. And then also remember things like where a face looks, your eye will look. There's a continuation there. So if I put my title or something important there, we're going to look at it. Now we've got things like logos to deal with. So using these kind of structures on the page and other information, dates, times, etc., that could really help with that. But that's a fairly static composition still, but it's still more interesting than just having everything exactly in the centre and a figure and, you know, the dates and the times and everything aligning. There's nothing wrong with it, but there might be a more interesting way of getting that composition. This is often the safest one, and the one that, you know, as a beginning designer, you'll do that. And it definitely suits some things really, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. But we want you to understand how to use grid structures and to make things work. So the Fibbonacci sequence is, you know, really interesting in terms of its division. So again, you get that much larger, I'll turn it that way so you kind of use it either way, of course. So you're dividing the page up into sort of a much larger thing, and then you're dividing in the same ratio, and you can just keep going with it. So each of those sections can be divided again and again to get more interesting kind of structures going on. And you could have logos there, you could have text there, and it just creates this interesting way of organising things. And maybe we have a very large image sitting up here. Maybe we've got a face, and maybe it is symmetrical, the rest of it, okay. Something's going on, maybe our title's here. I don't know. That's what I want you to play around. Or you switch it the other way around, you divide it up so the title's there, and then you try using that division. Oh, and by the way, all your sheets of paper are based on that. So an A3 sheet is basically a Fibbonacci ratio. So that's one of the reasons we're using A3 for the poster, is because you can easily work with this division. So it's a very fundamental kind of way of dividing things up. It can make your whole, you can just keep going with it. You can make your whole kind of, each section is kind of getting divided smaller and smaller. Again, great places to put logos or something interesting. And you can just keep dividing and dividing. So it's a way of creating a grid, really. But again, it gets a little more interesting if you make it slightly angled. Try it. You don't know how it will go. But again, you know, this could be, you know, your title could be here, something there. Maybe, yeah, the logo does go there at the top, I don't know. And we have, again, we have a space where we could put text, and we have a larger space where we could, you know, have some kind of an image. But again, it's fairly static. So if you want something a little bit more engaging, you know, try putting that same thing on its side. And that's why I've given you the sheet of paper, so you can literally just, it's tracing paper, you can just literally move it around on the page. And again, you know, you're using it to divide the area up, and you're getting much more kind of interesting compositions. So that's where we're up to, and as we move into it, experimenting with size. So if we come down here and look at these beautiful drawings by Sky, have a look at them. So we're looking at that, you know, what I would be saying is try putting it on the side. So it doesn't quite match because she's done her own thing. That's why I wanted you to draw them on those templates. But if we tried, you know, turning that on its side or that, and the other thing we can look at is literally putting this over the top and trying out your structures. When you go to do the variations, you'll be able to put it over there and just play around with how they go. One more thing I've got in here that can be useful as well. I think I've got them in here. Oh yeah, over here. So these are other ways of working to see the possibility. It doesn't matter what size they are. You just get strips of paper and you use them to try out different compositions. So instead of that, we could do that and just have a look at it, see what it looks like. And we can also use it to zoom in on something to see what the potential is. So say Sky's doing this one, instead of having, which is already, can you see she's already used that division of space? It's already a rule of thirds, you know, close to Fibbonacci, division, the snake on one side, quite large type. But what you can do with this technique is you can, and this works at any size, you can start to have a look, well, what would it be like if I zoomed in on the snake and just, do I need all that? You know, how much of that do I need? Can I zoom in and get a stronger composition? Depends which one you're looking at. Certainly for these ones, my comment was, it's a bit passive. It's like she's got a good division of space there, but it's not connecting with you because the face is so small, really, whereas where she's done a